after which he sat down and touched the ground, activating his ability. Olivia didn't understand what he was doing. Ethan, on the contrary, understood everything perfectly. He realized that Glenn had been hiding his real rank all this time. Our hero called out to Olivia, warning her that her opponent's technique was too dangerous. Glenn himself used extraction on one of the stones sticking out of the ground. A couple of seconds later, the guy towered over the girl, standing on a huge stone. Looking at Olivia, he said that the most interesting part of the show would now begin, after which he used the swing ability, which allows you to use the extracted object as a weapon. Everyone watched what was happening in amazement. Olivia guessed that all this time her opponent had been running away, looking for a suitable stone for his ability. The next moment he lifted the stone on which he had just stood upward, as if it weighed nothing. Then he threw it at the girl. He said that with this attack he would get rid of Olivia and prove his superiority to everyone. Glenn was so carried away by his fantasies that he did not notice someone else's presence behind him. The next moment he was attacked by Antonio, pinning him to the ground. Glenn shouted that sneaking up on an enemy from behind is for weaklings. Turning his attention to Olivia, who had managed to build a shield that prevented her from colliding with the stone, Glenn realized that she was stronger than he had expected. Suddenly, the stone in front of her broke into many small pieces. Afterwards, the girl saw Antonio in front of her, who broke this stone with his ability. Looking at him, Olivia said that this was her opportunity to show herself, and he shouldn't interfere. The guy replied that it was too dangerous, and his duty was to protect his subordinates. Looking at him with displeasure, Olivia asked if he really thought that she herself could not cope with this situation. Antonio replied that he was firmly convinced that the girl would have done a great job herself, but the problem was different. Looking behind him, he nodded towards Glenn, who was rushing at him with a club, and said that this guy would not calm down so easily. Using his ability, Antonio instantly found himself behind Glenn and attacked him, throwing him over himself onto his back. Ethan, standing to the side, watched what was happening with interest. Suddenly, Antonio turned his attention to him, which made the hero tremble. Ethan shouted that he was giving up. He really didn't want to fight someone like Antonio. The guy who approached asked why Ethan warned Olivia about the danger before Glenn attacked. The hero replied that their sergeant can sometimes overdo it without thinking about the consequences. Continuing to approach, Antonio said that Ethan did not know how to lie at all. He in turn retreated back, recalling that a couple of seconds ago he had given up. However, Antonio ignored him and stood next to Ethan, intercepting his hand with the blade. The hero of the hands, due to such an unexpected attack, released the weapon from his hands, pointing it upward. But the next moment, the dagger was already on the right, and he grabbed it with his free hand. Ethan swung it at his opponent. Antonio had no choice but to let our hero go. After that, he jumped back to a safe distance. He stared at Ethan, studying him. Taking a defensive stance, Antonio asked who he really was. Ethan replied that he was an ordinary warrior from the 3rd Squad of the 10th Platoon, with an F-rank ability. Antonio wanted to say something, however. At that moment, our hero's attention switched from the enemy to the wristwatch, which showed that he could hold out for only 1 minute. The guy asked what Ethan was looking for there. Instead of answering, our hero scratched the back of his head and laughed awkwardly. Then he pointed towards the stands, saying that there was a crowd there that was just waiting for Ethan to make another mistake. Antonio realized that his opponent was simply playing for time and said that he hated people like him most of all. When he asked why Ethan didn't at least try to win, the hero backed away from the guy, asking what he could do on his own. Antonio said that it was advice, not a warning. Ethan asked if there was any point in that, since he was only an F-rank. Antonio said that at the end of the battle, the scouts would choose the worst ones and send them to other schools. After his words, the hero began to approach his opponent, saying that he did not want to go to another school. When Ethan stopped, he said that he could not guarantee Antonio that he would remain alive, since he had become his opponent. Immediately after this, a red aura began to surround our hero. It seeped out of his body, filling the surrounding space. The system reported that Ethan's physical indicators had tripled, and he could also see not only the level of someone else's ability, but how it worked, as well as its weaknesses. Ethan's condition will only return to normal if the opponent dies or his soul essence is completely destroyed. The true ability of our hero is the skill of perfect execution with the enemy, which has an S rank. All this time, Antonio remained in place, observing the changes that were happening to the guy opposite. He assumed that the low-grade dagger was just a part of the manifestation of his true ability. Turning his attention to Antonio, Ethan saw that the opponent's ability was only a B rank, which was that he could catch any target. Antonio was shocked when our hero said that his ability was not as outstanding as he previously thought. The guy realized that he needed to be careful with Ethan, since he was able to see the abilities of other people. Meanwhile, the hero, surrounded by an aura of murder, pointed a dagger at the enemy, saying that he could no longer endure and hold back. He asked if Antonio could stop him. Without waiting for an answer from the enemy, he again asked whether he could cope with this task. Feeling completely superior to his opponent, Ethan changed his position, rotating towards in one hand. He waited for Antonio to make his move. Classmates watching this did not understand why those two were just standing there. Michael, who was starting to get annoyed by this, shouted at Antonio to go on the offensive because he had come to watch Ethan being beaten. Antonio himself tried to determine how best to approach his opponent. Although our hero was not in a protected stance, he did not have any open areas to strike. Olivia also felt this strange aura coming from Ethan. This guy no longer looked like the loser he seemed to her at first. Looking at him, she felt fear. She tried to get her emotions under control, realizing that they had to help Antonio, and ordered everyone to attack Ethan. The next moment, everyone ran to carry out her order, attacking the enemy, but he deftly avoided them. Surrounding the hero from all sides, Olivia finally managed to reach Ethan. The next moment, our hero found himself pinned to the ground by Olivia. Dissatisfied with what happened, Antonio asked the girl why she did it. She replied that she was also obliged to protect all members of the squad in which she was a member. Antonio said that he did not need anyone's protection. Olivia's words about whether he was sure of this made him think. When the girl attacked him, the guy quickly left the line of attack. He also avoided a trap set by other members of the squad. It all looked more like a cat playing with its prey. Adjusting his tie, he replied that he wasn't sure he could really handle Ethan on his own. Noticing the shadow of a smile on Antonio's face, Olivia was shocked and did not hear his words that she had better dispel her ability before she got hurt. The next moment, her armor collapsed and began to disappear, causing the girl to fall into bewilderment. The others also didn't understand what was happening, as they watched as their bracelets began to break without any reason. When Ethan noticed Antonio's gaze on him, he said that they had great teamwork. However, the guy still continued to gaze intently at the hero, causing him to be wary. Sighing, Antonio asked if Ethan had come to his senses. Ignoring this question, our hero turned to Olivia, saying that 5 minutes had already passed and they should get off him. Turning around, Antonio said that next time no one would bother them. Ethan replied wearily that once was enough for him. However, Antonio ignored him, advising him to practice a little before their next meeting. With doom in his voice, Ethan shouted after the departing guy that this time was enough for him, and there was no point in them meeting again, but he was again ignored. Following their sergeant, the rest of the squad members hastened to leave the field. Left alone, our hero tiredly sank to the ground. The shocked Mr. Reed announced the result of the battle, which was hard to believe. Glenn's squad won. At the same time, an important conversation took place in the director's office. Director Roger handed over to his guest the documents that he had previously requested. Taking in his hands a stack of documents containing students' personal files, he came across a recently revealed 11th grade student, Antonio. Patrick noted that in middle school he did not have a single award, but in high school all the victories were his. After reviewing all his data, he concluded that he was only able to get this far thanks to his rank. While studying the affairs of other students, his attention was drawn to the fact that one of the students had an F rank. He asked Principal Roger for details about the student. The man replied that Ethan had the lowest rank. After much discussion, they had to place the student in the combat class. Patrick was interested in the student. Turning the sheet over, he saw that there was a more detailed description, but the director said that it was not worth reading. In the special circumstances footnote, it was stated that Ethan lost his parents at age 8 and was unable to awaken his abilities due to shock, then suffered bullying from other relatives. And at age 10, he awakened his ability when the family was burgled. Something about this alarmed Patrick, because usually all children awaken their abilities at the age of 8. Previously, he had not encountered other cases where the awakening of a child's ability manifested itself later due to any circumstances. Patrick asked if Ethan's fighting abilities had changed since Ethan's awakening, and the headmaster replied that when he arrived at school, he still had an F rank. Something about this guy's case haunted him, and Patrick began to suspect that Ethan might be deliberately hiding his power. Putting the stack of documents aside, he said that he would like to meet this student in person. The director was surprised by such a request, and he hastened to say that Ethan would soon change schools due to his low rank. Afterwards, the man asked why it was decided to introduce military training into this particular school. Hearing this question, Patrick froze. Faced with his guest's warning glance, the director became frightened, thinking that he had asked a question regarding a secret government project that was not supposed to be discussed. He apologized, saying he shouldn't have asked that question. Looking at the affairs of the two students who caught his attention, Patrick replied that they were preparing for attacks from the north, and the system he introduced will help students change and become stronger. Every morning of our hero began the same way. He woke up exactly at 6 in the morning, after which he begins to get ready for school. In front of the mirror, he tells himself that today will be a good day. And at 6:30, he leaves the house. Because he was given cleaning duties, he has to go to school so early. This morning, at the entrance, he met other students who had come to school at such an early hour. Rumors about what happened yesterday spread throughout the school, so Ethan's name became on everyone's lips. Grinning, the girl said that most likely Antonio's team simply lost their vigilance yesterday, since they lost to someone like that. They couldn't believe that some loser had defeated the 11th graders with an ordinary dagger. Upon arriving at his class, Ethan washed the board, then brushed the chalk off the brushes, thinking that it would be better if they hung regular marker boards. Having finished with this, the hero moved on to washing the floors not only in the classroom, but not in the entire corridor. A little later, Michael and Sean approached him, the latter saying that Ethan's attempts to do at least something had benefited their team. Putting his hand on the hero's shoulder, he said that he managed to greatly surprise everyone that day. Sean admitted that they didn't expect anything from Ethan back then, but somehow they all managed to come out on top. After that, he left the class. At the next break, Glenn approached him. Ethan thought that now they would start beating him again. However, contrary to his expectations, a classmate asked our hero to get him some math handouts. Ethan was surprised that they weren't going to beat him up. He thought that because of what happened on the field, then they stopped bullying him. The next day, students from parallel classes also began to approach him with various requests, such as doing their homework for them. Even though the bullying against him stopped, they began to use him for their own purposes, which exhausted our hero much more. When the lesson ended, Mr. Reed asked no one to leave. He reminded everyone that today is the last day to join the unit. For 10th graders, this was mandatory, and there was no way to avoid it, so the teacher hurried his students to make a choice. Ethan thought for a long time about what he should choose and whether he would be taken anywhere at all. Mr. Reed said that a separate conversation would be held with those who did not choose anything. Everyone in the class started laughing at Ethan, saying that no normal unit would accept an F-rank fighter. Our hero did not give any importance to their words. However, when he read the list of units offered to him, the former calm disappeared and was replaced by horror. All units on the list are directly related to the army or the use of the ability. Many have already decided where they want to go and even split into groups. Michael was no exception, and immediately headed to the selected unit to submit his application. Ethan was left alone in the class, not deciding where he should enroll. He had already studied the proposed list several times, but our hero did not see a solution to the current situation. Suddenly he noticed that in one of the divisions there were no restrictions on ranks. There was also no interaction with abilities. It was only intended for the development of physical abilities. Ethan decided to sign up here because he assumed it would only be regular physical training, and there wouldn't be a lot of people. True, the hero found it strange that one unit was given an entire gym, while others had to be crammed into smaller rooms, which caused dissatisfaction among some. When he approached the gym, he was surprised by the huge number of people crowded at the entrance. Ethan thought he had come to the wrong place. He looked at the sheet that indicated the location of the unit he needed to make sure it was the right place for him. Suddenly, someone from the crowd shouted that there was an F-rank, turning everyone's attention to Ethan. Having examined everyone, the hero realized that almost everyone here was from the 9th grade. He didn't understand why they had gathered here, because they didn't have to join the unit. As everyone shouted in excitement that the leader was coming, Ethan moved closer to see who they were talking about. The next moment, he realized who exactly they were calling the leader, and decided that he needed to leave here immediately. Antonio noticed Ethan's face among the crowd and walked towards him. Due to constant pushing, our hero was unable to get out of the crowd. He was accidentally pushed towards the approaching guy. Confronted with him, Ethan asked in confusion if Antonio was the leader of the training unit. He nodded, saying he didn't expect to see Ethan here. Our hero was convinced that he needed to get out of here as quickly as possible. He did not want there to be a fuss if they fought with him in front of so many witnesses. This did not escape Antonio's keen eye, and he asked Ethan where he was going. The hero replied that he was mistaken and had come to the wrong place. Ethan promised that he would go look around here and immediately return when he found the office he needed. To his words, Antonio replied that there was nothing else nearby. He looked at Ethan for a few seconds, after which he expressed his assumption that he had come here in the hope that there would not be many people here. The hero admitted that this was indeed the case, but too large a crowd had gathered here, so he changed his mind about entering here. Antonio replied that it was not so easy to get into his unit, so Ethan need not worry about a large number of participants. But even with these arguments, our hero refused, recalling that his abilities are too insignificant. The unit leader had no choice but to force our hero inside. Heading to the middle of the hall, Antonio said that he would now conduct an entrance test, which Ethan would take along with everyone else. Taking a quick glance at everyone who wanted to join here, he was surprised that more people than usual had gathered today. Then he announced that the testing would consist of simply repeating a couple of exercises for Antonio, namely 30 burpees, 30 push-ups, again 30 burpees, and 30 squats. When Ethan heard that only one who could complete 10 approaches would be able to pass, he thought it would be easier to die than to fulfill this condition. A few minutes later, the daredevils from the first group were already exhausted, performing only the third approach. Some were unable to continue and decided to give up. They chose this unit because they thought it would be easier to get into than the others. But this turned out to be far from the case. Ethan watched from the sidelines, realizing that he had made a huge mistake in coming here. Looking at Antonio, who performed all the exercises he listed without difficulty, without even slowing down for a second, the hero understood why he was called a monster. Looking at the other side of the hall, the hero could only sympathize with the exhausted students. A couple of minutes later, stopping on the fourth approach, everyone gave up, unable to even stand up. After announcing that the first group had dropped out, Antonio turned around, announcing that testing of the second group would now begin. After his words, everyone recoiled from the guy in horror, confident that they would definitely not be able to cope with this impossible task. The girl standing next to our hero pushed him forward, saying that he would go first. This left only Ethan in front of Antonio while the others stepped aside. Turning to the guy standing opposite him, the hero asked if Antonio was really human, because he wasn't tired after doing so many approaches. Looking at Ethan, the leader of the unit said that he should not try to stall for time like that time on the battlefield. Then he turned to those who decided to sit on the sidelines and said that the second group could begin doing the exercises, ignoring all dissatisfied objections. A couple of minutes later, while doing the exercises, Ethan's mood changed regarding this introductory task. At home, he often trained on his own so that he could defend himself. Although the hero thought that he was pretty good at sports, training face-to-face with Antonio awakened his competitive spirit. But unfortunately, our hero's reserve of stamina was far from that of his opponent. At some point, Antonio said that the second group was stronger than the first, so he decided that they should speed up a little. Ethan was sure that this guy took pleasure in tormenting other people in such a terrible way. After a minute passed at an accelerated pace, everyone except Ethan decided to give up, and were now just watching what was happening. Seeing how our hero performed approaches on a par with Antonio, they could not believe that his abilities really had an F rank. Our hero did not intend to give in to his opponent, so he performed exercise after exercise, fighting his irritation towards Antonio. The leader of the unit himself was not even out of breath, calmly performing the exercises at a given pace. One of those watching lost count of which approach they were already performing. The girl sitting next to him suggested that the seventh had already gone. Hearing this, others began to support Ethan, recognizing that he was not as bad as they said he was.